last lecture we focused on the components of stress. Remember, we looked at the stressors, which are the events that lead to the stress reaction. And so we learned about what events cause stress and what the negative consequences could be for your body, but also about some of how adaptive stress can be in short-term situations. Now, this time we're going to focus on the other end of the spectrum, not what happens when you get stress, but actually how you deal with stress. So this lecture is focused with coping strategies for stress. So there are two broad ways of looking at how someone copes with a stressful situation. They can do what's known as problem-focused coping, which is where they look at the situation as something that can be influenced. It's something that can be changed, and I have the ability to change it, and as a result, I'm going to figure out a way to do that. So that's the problem-focused coping. You look at the stressor like something that can be fixed. On the other end, we have emotion-focused coping, which is when we believe, by truth or by thought, that a stressful situation cannot be changed. This is when we might use our emotions instead of our thoughts in how to solve a problem. So think about the same situation, two different people. They fail a test. Both of them fail the test. It gives them an extreme amount of stress. The problem-focused kid is going to say, okay, I messed up. When the next test comes around, I'm going to use that stress to motivate me to study better. The emotion-focused group, instead, that kid is the one that goes to their buddy's dorm room, and they sit there and they just chat for a little while and talk about how shitty it felt to get a failing grade on a test. Now, both of those strategies help to relieve the stress, but they're really mostly appropriate for certain situations. So with the example of the test, problem-focused coping is the most effective strategy because that's the strategy that's going to reduce the stress over time because you do have control over your grades. Emotion-focused coping is often better for situations where you have no or very little levels of control. For example, having an extreme illness or dealing with the loss of somebody else. Those are extreme stressors that you cannot change. So for those situations, looking up on WebMD how to figure out how to beat your child's cancer is not necessarily going to help you as much as reaching out to people who are going through the same thing and getting support. So some people respond better to different types of coping. So for some people, that problem-focused coping with that situation might be beneficial. But for the most part, it all comes down to your perceived level of control. And what we find is that if you believe that you cannot control the situation, then it is best for you to use emotion-focused coping. If you believe that there is some level of impact that you can have, then it's best to use problem-focused coping. Now let's look at perceived control in a different way. Now let's say that, is perceived control better than no perceived control? What's the answer there? Well, what we find is that when you have a sense of control about your stressor, you have better health outcomes than when you have no control. So in this study that I've got right here, we had 3 rats. So we have the executive rat. This guy right here, he has the ability to turn off the shock control. So if he presses this little bar, it spins the wheel, it sends an electrical signal down to turn off the shock. He gets shocked right here with this little loop that's touching his tail. The subordinate rat, on the other hand, has the same lever, has the same little wheel here, but it does not connect back to the shock source. So he has no control over whether or not he's feeling a shock. And then on the other side, we have the control rat, which has the exact same apparatus. The only difference is that the loop is not connected to a shock source. And what we find is that the executive rat has far better health outcomes than the subordinate rat, the rat that had no control over his outcome. Now, the control rat is obviously the one that had the best health outcomes because he had no stressors. And so he's going to do better than both of these guys. But the executive rat, the one which has control over whether or not it gets shocked, performs much better than the subordinate rat who gets shocked in a manner that is completely out of his control. So if control and the amount of control that we are able to put over a situation is impacted by perception, then what generates that perception? Well, oftentimes our perception of control comes down to what's known as an explanatory style. You can have one of two main explanatory styles. Most people, or rather not most people, but a lot of people fall in the middle. They can be neutral. But we're going to look at the extremes here. People that are optimistic generally do better. They explain things in a way that's more positive. They're the ones that in certain times they usually expect that things will work out for the best, whereas the pessimists believe that things will work out for the worst. Well, it turns out that the people with the optimistic explanatory style had better control over their stressful situations. They didn't believe that it was up to fate for whatever happened to them. They believed that, hey, things are going to work out and I'm going to find a way to do that. So they had better control over the stressors. They were better able to cope with bad situations. And as a result of that, they had stronger immune systems and better health outcomes, better moods, better overall well-being. Here's an example of how profound this effect is. Two separate, independent, validated studies have found that pessimists have a 2 times greater incidence of death in longitudinal studies. So what I mean here is that they did 10-year longitudinal studies with people as old as 70 years old. And what they were doing was they were looking at their explanatory style and their health outcomes, among many other things. This was just one of the findings. And what they found was that those who were pessimistic died at 2 times the rate of those who were optimistic. So that means that in the pessimistic group, they might have had 24 deaths, and in the optimistic group, only 11 or 12. So optimism pays off. In addition, we found they did a study with nuns at one point, and they found that it was also double. They found that those that were more optimistic in a statement written in their 20s were, oh goodness, what was it? They wound up living, at 85, at the age of 85, twice as many pessimists had died than optimists. In addition, those that were labeled as optimists lived, on average, 7 years longer than those that were labeled as pessimists. So, if you are a pessimist, it might be beneficial to reconsider and try and figure out how you can change your mindset. But you may not be able to. On top of that, humor is a very good way of sort of boosting your mood. So, humor's another way. Now, some of those things are all internal. What about external things? Well, the biggest external thing that you can have is social support. So social support isn't just your family. It isn't just your friends. It's your community. So it can be your family members. It can be, your good friends, but it can also be your work colleagues, people that you go to church with, people on any sports team that you're a part of. These groups of people join around you and they give you a sort of like a not necessarily like a meaning for life, but it's along those lines. We find that people who have good social support have better immune functioning, they have better cardiovascular systems, lower blood pressure, they heal faster, they live longer, and they have a lot better health outcomes. Now, one of the things that we do see is that the percentage of people who experience high social support changes as we age. But the most important thing that you should look at here, I personally feel, is that regardless of that fact, social support remains pretty darn high. We have social support no lower than 70% at any age, which means that social support is out there. If you don't have it, get it because it's available to you. Another type of social support beyond people is animals can actually function as social support as well. We find that people who, went through chemotherapy, when they have a pet, they go back into the doctor less often for emergency needs. They, do better with their remission. They generally are healthier and happier. The reason for this is because social support gives us a feeling of being liked, being encouraged, and being affirmed in who we are. In addition, we feel a level of responsibility to those other individuals, which actually changes our behavior as well. So think about it this way. If we have the social support of our family members, we're going to do our best to make sure that we're healthy and happy for them. Not only are we going to do that for them, but they're also going to act back towards us in a way that encourages us to have health behaviors. So, an example, my grandfather had diabetes in his last 2 years of life. It's an unusual thing to develop in your 80s, but he got it in his 80s. And, if he didn't have my grandma around, I know that he wouldn't have taken his insulin. How do I know? My grandma had a stroke probably about 5 months after he was diagnosed with the diabetes. So she was unable to communicate to him that he needed to take his medicine. So we go down to help him take care of my grandma, and sure enough, he hasn't taken his medicine. And indeed, he still needed us to remind him to take his medicine. So that's an example of how social support operates in the real world. It's not all just, la la la, I have people who love me. That's a big part of it. But it's also the encouragement to perform and engage in health-related behaviors. This is part of why, and we're going to talk about this in a second, church has such good life expectancy outcomes. These close relationships predict health. So let's combine all this together. How can we manage stress? Well, one of the best things that we can do is when we do have control, feel that sense of control. I don't know if any of you have been to any of the, blank Anonymous, but my dad was in Gamblers Anonymous when I was a kid. And so I've read the Serenity Prayer. And this is one of the things that the Serenity Prayer really emphasizes. Give me the strength to accept the things I cannot change. The something to accept. I don't remember it, but basically the effect is you need the strength to accept what you can't change, the power to change the things you can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, that's what having a sense of control is all about. In addition, it's really beneficial to be optimistic, to believe that things are going to work out for the best. And if you do believe that, then you're going to act in a way to bring that out. In addition, it's really important to have social support from family members, friends, colleagues, and pets. They reduce your stress, and they give you an overall improved health. Now, I mentioned that the church has some really good effects, right? It's one of those places that gives you that sense of community. Well, there's a place where it can get kind of sinister as well, and so you have to be careful. And this is where it comes to external locus of control. Many churches in many religions have the same problem where they teach you that you are powerless, that everything is laid out and planned before you, and that nothing you do can change the outcome. So this leads to this external locus of control, this belief that things happen to me and I can do nothing about them. This is very bad for your health. Internal locus of control, on the other hand, is very good for your health, because what this does is this tells you that events in my life can be impacted by my actions. And by knowing this, I can act in a way to positively bring about change. So church is great if it encourages an internal locus of control. You don't need church. There are plenty of other socially fulfilling activities that can bring about the same benefits, because it all comes down to having that social support. But social support combined with an internal locus of control that lets you know that you have power over what happens to you, plus an optimistic explanatory style, can generally lead to better outcomes with regards to how you handle stress. In addition to all that stuff, when it comes to people and yourself, one of the other things you can do is exercise. And in fact, exercise is a huge way to improve your mood. If you are stressed out, exercise can help get rid of that stress and possibly help you shed some pounds. So if you look at this wonderful graph that we've got over here, this was a study where they were looking at depression scores for individuals and different treatment methods. So in the orange line right there at the top, that's the no treatment group. So this is our control. And you'll remember from the research methods lecture that control is a group that has nothing really done to it. So they just sort of act as a way for us to see how depression scores change as a result of time. The relaxation treatment group went through a relaxation therapy technique. The aerobic exercise group had no psychological therapy whatsoever. They were told to exercise. That's it. Now, if you look at the graph, it's pretty profound what's happening here. We see that the no treatment group had no change in their depression scores. None whatsoever. Now, the relaxation group and the aerobic exercise group were both pretty impressively effective. The relaxation treatment group dropped by 4 points. That's huge. That's wonderful. But what we see is that the aerobic exercise group dropped by a very powerful amount. It dropped to the point where they were no longer even categorizable as depressed. So exercise is one of the best ways to boost your energy, increase your confidence, get rid of depression and anxiety, and help you manage your stress. If, like many people out there, you struggle with some sort of biological problem where you get really stressed out. And I say biological because it's not all psychological. Anxiety and depression all relate to the neurotransmitters that are in your brain. So one of the things that we can do is we can use your biological signals from your body, and hook you up to a machine that's known as a biofeedback machine, and you can use that machine to help you manage your stress. So let's talk about how this works. You have, this is a rather complex biofeedback machine right here. So let's talk about a more basic one. A simple armband that sits around your wrist and it measures your pulse continuously. If you begin to get stressed out, it beeps and it alerts you to let you know that you are getting stressed out. Now, the way that they measure that stress is by your heartbeat, right? So what we use this as is a way to determine what our triggers are. So you can tell from the biological messages being sent to the electronic equipment when you're being stressed out in a way that you might not yet perceive. Your heart rate might be beating slightly faster than normal, and you might not yet perceive it as stress, but it begins to grow. And so you get this biofeedback, and you can learn what is causing you stress and how to use relaxation and meditation to reduce that stress. So biofeedback is particularly effective for things like anxiety, things like TMJ, which is a jaw disorder. It's effective for that. Tension headaches. It's pretty effective for different things. They have different ways of measuring your biological symptoms. So it's not always going to be heart rate, but there's always going to be some sort of biological input from your body and some digital feedback from some sort of electronic machine. Now, if you remember last lecture, we talked about type A and type B personalities. Remember, type A are the types that are easily stressed, aggressive, and they have higher incidences of heart disease and other negative health outcomes, as well as hardened arteries, things of that nature. Now, personality is, for the most part, pretty set, but you can modify some of the behavioral components of a personality in a way that modifies that lifestyle, which reduces the occurrence of heart attacks. So, these are two groups right here that are the type A personalities. Group orange is the control patient, and the greenish line down there is the lifestyle modification patient. And what we see is that for the control patients, they had a higher incidence of heart attacks, a recurrent heart attack, than those that had the lifestyle modification. In fact, they were no more likely than they were at the beginning, at the end, to get a heart attack, whereas the control patients went up over time. So I mentioned before that religion oftentimes has positive effects. And what we see is that it's actually a relatively linear trend when it comes to how often you attend a religious service. We see that those that attend religious services fairly regularly, at least once a week, have a much higher life expectancy. We're talking 75 to about 82. So we're looking at an additional 7 years. That's not nothing. Now, one of the things that we have to think about is what's driving this. So we see over here that it's pretty much on par with people who regularly exercise as far as the benefits. So we believe that it all comes down to health for both of these. Regular exercise boosts your health. Regular church attendance encourages health behaviors. So these two work in conjunction to improve your overall lifespan and well-being. So to sum it up, this is the way that it operates. The religious involvement gives you that social support. It improves your optimistic attitude by giving you less stress and giving you something to believe in. And it also encourages these healthy behaviors. So the three of these functions work together to give you better health with less immune suppression, fewer stress hormones, and lower incidences of suicide. So religious involvement, the belief in God, does not give you better health. It's these intervening factors right here that give you better health. That sense of community involvement, positive affect, and the health behavior encouragement. So, to sum it all up, as if you didn't already know, the best ways to reduce stress are to exercise, have good family and friends, find a way to relax, have a good sense of community, have a positive outlook on life, and just take care of your body. Do these things, and you'll be better equipped to handle any stressful situation that life has to throw at you. So that's it. I hope this has been a helpful lecture for you guys, because I feel like it's a really important one. Learning how to deal with stress is life-saving. So, I hope it was helpful for you. Feel free to ask me any questions. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.